dottoressa Maria Pallotta-Chiarolli. Buon pomeriggio. Good afternoon, Maria. How are you?
Grazie, Antonio. Buon pomeriggio. Bene, bene. And thank you for having me on.
We'll talk a bit about the reason, the background to the citation for this honour, which is, we should say, congratulations for being recognised for your work and efforts over the years. And then we'll figure out where this name Pallotta-Chiarolli comes from and your Italianness. So the recognition for the award. How have you come to? What has been the work in these areas, and then we'll see how you've come to enter them and what have been the consequences.
Yeah, thank you so much, Antonio. It's been overwhelming. It was a very difficult award to accept because of the concerns in our country around Australia Day, what it means to different communities, Australia as a place of welcome to so many migrants and refugees, including my family, but also a place where we haven't really taken action and understood about the Aboriginal people, the First Peoples. But when I found out that the nominators were coming from Aboriginal, multicultural, multi-faith and LGBTIQ communities, I thought, you know what, I can put this to good use and I can use this to honour my family, honour my Italian heritage and continue the good work, hopefully.
Okay, so that's an interesting concept. So you were saying because it was connected with Australia Day, there could be some concerns, more than some concerns. We call it Australia Day officially. A lot of people call it Invasion Day, and there are protests, yes. and there's quite a bit of discussion around changing the date. But you said the nomination and the support has come from some of those communities. So I mentioned LGBTIQ, and then you've talked about the Aboriginal communities. So there are two important elements there in your work and your research.
Yeah.
Let's talk about these two things, and then the other one that you mentioned, your family. So
Italian,
yes. The Italian, yes. So what work have you done in the LGBTIQ plus area?
Sure. I would say it began in the mid-80s, Antonio, when we had HIV/AIDS, and I had a very supportive family. My parents, Stefano and daughter Pallotta, loved people for who they are and always respected people for who they were. So from the time I was 16, I had lesbian friends, and often they came to my place there in Hectorville for pizza, e vino, and to have a safe and comfortable place to hang out. When my friend had AIDS in 1987, he asked me to write a book, and I became an activist then in these issues as an ally. Because you know what, Antonio, sometimes people will listen to a straight person and a straight married woman or a mother, but they won't listen to a gay person. So I thought if I can do something there, and it went on from there. And now I've been working with AGMC, which is the Australian LGBTIQ Multicultural Council. So I'm an ally on that group, and we have 35 groups of people who want to live their faith, live their culture, live their sexuality and gender. So that's that work. And we do social events, we support people who are suicidal, we try and connect families, we work in government and policy.
Now, you've used that word ally a couple of times. Yeah. Explain, what is an ally?
An ally is a term that's given to someone who does not belong to that community, but is recognised for the work they do. Now, sometimes, Antonio, allies can behave very badly. They take over.
Yeah. Okay.
They take over. They make it all about them. And an ally is someone who can step forward, use what we call the privilegio, whatever privilege we have, to open a door, to make it possible for other people to go through and take it further. But an ally is not something you call yourself. An ally is someone that other people from a community say, you know what, you're doing good work, you're supporting us, but you also know where your boundaries are. And that's very important. It's like someone who's not Italian wanting to support Italians, but sometimes behaving in a way that makes it all about them. And they may not be Italian.
Yeah, so in fact, so you were saying sometimes someone who is straight, married woman with children might be listened to more rather
Yes,
than someone who's coming from those communities.
yes. And now that I'm older, I'm 61. Sometimes young people, young gay people, or young Muslims, or young people may not be listened to. So I've become a kind of wonderfully, and I'm so grateful for this, a kind of mentor. I do what I need to do. I try and open some doors, and then I step back, and I try and make sure that young people have those voices, including Italian young people from our culture.
Yes, and I didn't say, but you were or you are associated with Deakin University, and you've been an academic like this. I said doctor because you're an academic. What sort of research then do you do? Has your research been connected to this work?
Yes, my research has always been about cultural diversity, and I did a lot of early work on my Italian background, my family, and all these issues around sexuality, gender, patriarchy, oppression. I looked at what happened in our families in war, and what brought them to Australia, what happens to women, which is what the Ascolta Women work is all about, and I'll talk about that later.
Yes.
But this is the kind of work. I've always looked at the intersections, come si dice in italiano, le intersezione, grazie, of all the different things that we are, and how we should have the right to love them and live them, and what happens when everywhere you go, your community that you want to belong to tells you that part of you I don't like, this part I want. So I like you being Italian or Catholic, but I don't want you to be gay. But here's an Italian gay Catholic person who wants to be all of that.
Yeah, so there are many dimensions to diversity and
yes,
to inclusion, potential inclusion.
Yes.
Okay, so that's the gay community broadly defined. I guess you mentioned also Aboriginal, indigenous communities.
Yeah, so I guess I feel very humbled, because I've always been the kind of person that one project links to another, and one community, as I said, also belongs to another. So many years ago, I met a Wurundjeri elder, Annette Shiberas, whose father is Maltese. He arrived at 16, no education, off the boat. And so my work is about now looking at the good things and the terrible things between Italian, Greek, and Maltese cultures and Aboriginal people. So, for example, some of the love relationships are beautiful. Some of the pressure, for example, some Italian men experienced when they fell in love with an Aboriginal woman. But also the other side is, Antonio, we need to be, as Italians, we need to be very honest about some of the terrible things that happened. And I did go to Alice Springs and I saw some police archives. I was given permission. And there were some names I knew and the things they had done to Aboriginal women. So I'm looking at all of that, the good stories, the bad stories, the ugly stories between migrants and Aboriginal people.
Yes, well, I don't know if you know, one of my regular guests is Mick Scarcella. And he calls himself Abtalian. His mother is Aboriginal and his father is Italian. And
absolutely
family. And he's a strong advocate for Indigenous matters, works in Indigenous health.
Wonderful.
But is
I know his work.
Oh, you can cool. Okay. And
I very much know his work, and Michele and I are working on how we're going to collaborate on this project. We've also got amazing people like Paolo Moravito, who's a Aboriginal and Italian Calabrese. There's so many wonderful people who are coming forward who want to be part of this work, and I'm just really my job is to collect it and put it out there.
Yes. Okay. Now let's have a brief pause to hear some messages from our sponsors. Then we'll come back to speak to Maria Pallotta-Chiarolli. Okay. So Maria, we were starting to talk about the Aboriginal part of your work. I mentioned Mick Scarcella that you know, and I guess I've been trying to get an Aboriginal Italian connection. I gather there should be some in Adelaide, but I haven't quite made the connections yet. So we have a regular conversation with Mick once a month.
That's wonderful. So good. Yeah, Mick's awesome.
You talked about Aboriginals, but was there a particular area of focus in the indigenous community that you looked at?
There is actually, Antonio. There's a particular theme of children, growing up in families and often finding connection. So, for example, the love of family, the love of community coming together. And I'm sure Mick Scarcella has said this. And often in Aboriginal people communities and Italian communities, that was often there. Sometimes poverty, the toughest jobs, working in rural and remote areas. You've also got an amazing person there in Adelaide called Eduardo Chrismani, who's a filmmaker. His father is Italian.
Okay.
And they lived out near Cooperpedy, but because his father, who'd come from northern Italy as a refugee after the war, because he fell in love with this amazing Aboriginal woman, had to live outside Cooperpedy with no running water. Yeah, so those kinds of stories, I want to look at the tensions and I want to look at the joy of love, but also what it means, in these families. I think the other thing I wanted to do, and I'm doing, is looking at the things that we as migrants haven't really paid attention to. So, for example, my uncle, if I can say, Zio Angelo Pallotta, was a prisoner of war in Cowra in New South Wales. He was caught in Libya. And of course, we know, and the Italians still need to talk about what we did a lot more in North Africa. Now, if I could just say, Antonio, he ended up in Cowra as a prisoner of war. But the Australians let the soldier Italian men go out farming, cycling, orchestra, seeing movies, making food. Now, across the river, and why aren't Italians talking about this? Across the river from Zio Angelo and the camp was the Arambi Aboriginal Mission. And the mission, with their manager of Aboriginal people, had way less rights, no rights. And they would look at the Italian prisoners and go, they're supposed to be the enemy. They're supposed to be prisoners. And they have the freedom that we don't even have on our own country.
Yes, that's an interesting perspective, because I also know of an example of a prisoner of war who ended up being allowed to work on a farm. He was working on the farm, got friendly with the farmer's daughter, fell in love, and he had to go back to Italy. And he eventually came out and married the farmer's daughter, which was a beautiful story.
Yeah.
And they were here. Mount Parker around in South Australia.
But Antonio, I do need to say that some of the younger Italians from Italy, especially some of the amazing scholars like Angela Viora, Margherita Gangelucci, so many wonderful scholars who are actually studying these truths about what happened in North Africa. My own cousin's children, Fabio Formato, when he came here for his honeymoon, the most important thing for him was to go to Cowra and see where his nonno had lived. And he wanted to know about Aboriginal people. He wanted to know what life was like there. So him and Stefania Tangredi, and I get so much hope from that the younger Italian generations want to know.
Yes, and I visited Loveday, where my grandfather was interned, not prisoner of war, but yeah. Okay, now we're getting close to the end of the program. We still need to talk about this Pallotta-Chiarolli. Now, you've been mentioning Pallotta. So the Chiarolli, where's the double barrel name come from? Yes,
so my parents are from Squillani, provincia of Avellino, and my in-laws, the Chiarolli, is Dino and Lydia, who are from Friuli, Percoto. And so that's where the name comes from my husband and myself. And I guess if I could have time, Antonio, I do want to, and there's such an Adelaide in me. I grew up there. I grew up in Hectorville. My in-laws in Brookler Park. One of the things that we're doing on March the 6th at San Giorgio La Molada at 2:00 on Sunday afternoon is we're having a launch of 3 books, with a lot of Adelaide writers, Adelaide stories of Maria Fantasia, Pina Marino Leyland. We're looking at La Storia from la Tavola, the importance of food, the joys of food, but also the tensions and often the issues for women around creating food, things that happened. Sometimes, I know the arguments around La Tavola. So we really want to put a call out to Adelaide people, everyone, to come to San Giorgio La Molada, Payneham, Henry Street on March the 6th at 2:00 for a wonderful catch-up. And Vinnie Ciccarello, our wonderful pioneer, is launching it We are so
beautiful.
excited. Yeah,
Beautiful.
she's
Okay.
amazing.
Yes,
And
lovely.
she's one of our pioneers. Yeah.
Indeed, indeed. So now is this the Ascolta Women
Yes.
thing that you're talking about?
Yes.
Because I looked
This
it
is
up and I
my-
saw there was something happening in Melbourne as well. So,
Oh, there's lots of stuff happening in Melbourne. We're groups
Yeah.
of women. So we include Anna Maria Dell'Osso, who most of us know Anna
Yeah.
Maria, one of the most wonderful, pivotal writers. Women from Mildura, Lucy Calipari, Eleanor Calipari, Melbourne, London, Elise Valmorbida from London. So we're a group of women from Italy. All of us come together to look at the pleasure, the joys of our cultures, but also to do some tough work, Antonio,
yeah.
on the things that happened in our culture. So Maria Fantasia will be launching her book about her father and the perpetration of violence, but trying to understand what happened to her father when he was growing up. Pina Marino Leyland has got this amazing book. She lived 100 days with her mum, Michelina, during COVID, and they've come up with this beautiful recipe book from Abruzzo, but there's also the stories behind that. And then we've got our stories from La Tavola, lots of amazing stories about the good, the bad, and the ugly of food in our cultures.
Okay, I will have to follow up this March the 6th initiative with San Giorgio La Molada, and I'm sure that's something that will be of interest to Comites.
Yes, please,
and
please
Marinella
do.
Marmo. Yes, okay, indeed. Thank you. That was very, very important, useful. Okay, now let's go to the Italian. You did say a bit where you're from, Avellino and Friuli. Cool. And so, were you born originally from Adelaide then?
Yes, I was born in Adelaide. Yes, I grew up in Hectorville, and my mum's still there. And my father passed away, and my mum is lucky. She's surrounded by a few Italians still left there, but a lot of new communities, Indian, Asian, who really have adopted my mum as auntie.
Yeah.
So my mum is very well loved, and I love her openness. My parents have always been like that. My dad passed away 4 years ago. He was very much loved, and I know this award, when I finally get the bling, the gold, whatever it is, Antonio, it's going to go home to Adelaide to my mum, who's already said she's putting it near the photo of my father, because my nonni, my family, the women in my family, the men in my family taught me how to be strong, how to speak out, and how to also be loving and kind. And I want to honour my heritage in Adelaide and my heritage in Italy.
Yes. So now between Adelaide and Melbourne, have there been other trips or episodes?
Yes, Antonio, every 3 weeks I come there to stay with my mum for a week. And also my daughter, our daughter fell in love with a wonderful Calabrese boy from man from Adelaide. They live in Woodville, Allenby Gardens. And so we have a lot of reasons to come back to Adelaide. And also my husband's parents, the Chiarolli side, are also elderly. So we are constantly backwards and forwards because we've got lots of family and friends in Adelaide, and Adelaide is deep in our hearts. And yet Melbourne we've been in Melbourne 23 years, Antonio, and we love the lifestyle here. Yes.
Now, the way you've been saying some of those Italian words suggests to me that we could have had this conversation in Italian. Yeah, and it would have been very functional.
I'm so sorry, Antonio. I just get so nervous about my Italian because it's dialetto. Every time I go to Italy, the members of my family laugh at me and go, "We haven't heard words like that since 1956.
I'd say that's not uncommon. In fact, the first time I heard that on radio was I was talking to Professor Frank Bruno here from UniSA, had been awarded a Eureka Award, so very prestigious. And he said, when he first time I went to Italy, his cousins were laughing, enjoying hearing the language that he'd learned from his parents from the 1950s. But you still communicate. Yes. Beautiful. Okay, it's been delightful to speak to you and to see you, to have this multimedia approach.
It's wonderful.
And I have to follow up with Dominic Guerrera and Eduardo Chrismani.
Yeah,
is that correct?
Amazing filmmaker. Yeah, he's actually made a video of his father and his mother's life, his mother's side. Yeah.
Cool. And definitely get in touch with the people at San Giorgio La Molada. Club.
Yes, I'll
Will you be here in person for this?
Yes, I will be here, and San Giorgio have kindly allowed us to have this wonderful event on the space. But it's the Ascolta Donna, Teresa Capetola, Maria Fantasia, Anna Maria, Sara Bavato, who works with Global, a whole lot of multi-generational women from Italian background or affiliated who are really exploring some tough issues, but never losing sight, Antonio, of the importance of our culture and the joys of it. But we need to really, this is what Ascolta Donne do. We need to come to terms with the terrible things that have happened along the way.
Indeed, indeed. Well, again, thank you very much. And a question I typically ask my guests, sometimes with notice, sometimes without notice. Shall we dedicate a song to somebody in particular?
Yeah, I'd love to dedicate this to my parents, Stefano e Dora Pallotta, especially to my father who passed away 4 years ago. If every man was like my dad, life would be so much better. This was his song that he wanted at the funeral. And just loving our dads.
And the song is?
L'Arca di Noè.
L'Arca di Noè, ok.
Which he sang to me.
Yes, L'Arca di Noè interpretata da Sergio Endrico, e con questo diamo l'arrivederci sia a Maria che anche io chiudo per il programma, e ci sentiamo la settimana prossima.
Grazie for your amazing show, Antonio. Grazie.
Okay.
Sarà come l'Arca di Noè, il cane e il gatto io